So, good morning.
Morning.
Lisa and I have been having a really uncomfortable conversation about what is going on in the world in relation to diversity and pain and prejudice. And we are really uncomfortable talking about it. And we thought that that actually is the point, because what happens with prejudice is that people are very uncomfortable talking about it. I can feel my heart beating really fast.
Am I allowed
Really
to say?
yes. Really uncomfortable talking about it, and so we don't. And that's great for those of us in the happy majority for whom it doesn't really affect us that much, or for those who manage to be really adaptable and, you know, fit into whatever groups they want to work with or socialize with. That's fine. Let's all avoid the difficult subject. And it has erupted because of some violence. And you and I were talking about an expression, microaggressions, that has sort of entered our narrative. As leaders, we need now to have some uncomfortable conversations with the people in our business, with the people who are our customers, with people who are our suppliers. But if leaders don't take this thorny subject and start to have a proper discussion with people about how can we make this better, then I think nothing changes. And that's what's happened over decades. Not enough has changed because we've avoided having the really uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, and I think the conversations bit, which are emotional, you know, that you have kind of emotional responses to everything that you're hearing or saying, is the only way to drive it forward. And I think over the last, however long, companies have been very good at having their tick boxes for when they employ people, what category do you fit into, and that kind of notion of positive discrimination, and identifying, courses, diversity inclusion course, you go on that and then you're inducted and then tick the box.
Tick.
And it's that sense of actually, what does this look like on an ongoing basis, on a day-to-day basis, and what does it really feel like? And I think it's really important, probably to say as well, Francis, that we're not just talking about colour of your skin or your sexuality or whatever. It's anything that makes us feel different to those around us. So, people who drive an old banger, I'll use that example because someone was talking about it recently, they kind of chug into the car park at their office, park amongst all the flashy cars, and people look down them like, well, you clearly haven't got very much money, and do you really belong here? So it can be anything in terms of, we were talking about how you look or the colour of your hair, or your size, or whether you're a parent or not a parent, whether you understand and are allowed to comment on what's going on in schooling or homeschooling or whatever. Is anything that makes someone feel different that we need to be thinking about with inclusion.
And we are intuitively uncomfortable about people who, you see with children, they don't need to be taught, they point out differences in others. Oh, you've got really frizzy hair is what I used to get at school, because I looked different from all of the other children because I had curly hair. And that was, I can remember as a child finding that really humiliating. I mean, obviously, that's a tiny thing, but we also have layers of prejudice that build up over our lifetimes because of our experiences in life. And it can be really difficult to say, well, I feel differently about Jewish people or Muslim people or gay people or people who haven't been to university, or, oh my God, people with a Birmingham accent, or when I hear this kind of thing, it makes me feel, I'm not sure about that person. We have lots of prejudices, we have unconscious biases, we have conscious biases. And what we do is we like to gloss over and say, well, I've got an Asian friend, so I'm definitely not prejudiced about anything. It's much, I think it's difficult in the workplace to have these conversations, and that's why I think they need to be had. I'm feeling uncomfortable saying those things.
But that example of you with frizzy hair in the school playground is such a good example of how, where we're taught from a very young age that yes, that person might look different, but we don't comment on it, don't point it out. We just, you know, just pretend that doesn't happen, pretend they don't
Yeah.
look different or they're not behaving differently, and don't comment on it. So we learn from a very young age that actually we can't comment on anyone who looks a bit different unless they're amazing, like we were talking earlier about amazing footballers or whatever. Then that's great, we can put them up on a pedestal. Aren't they amazing? But for everyone else, it's like, actually we mustn't talk about it. So we wonder why when we get to the workplace people do feel a bit uncomfortable about something but we can't express it, or I feel uncomfortable about how I'm being treated, or I think how people are communicating with me, or just the eye contact, you know, the looks, or whatever it might be, but I can't say it. And it's that whole notion, I think, for managers to understand that actually we need to be able to have very open conversations and almost say, you know, so what is it that we've felt uncomfortable about in our lives, which could be last week, or it could be 10 years ago, or, you know, it could be on the school playground. What is it that we've experienced, and how did that feel? How did that affect us? And actually, what have we learned from that? Like, what are our strengths and what are the things we really appreciate about each other? And actually almost flip it in terms of, yes, you might have frizzy hair, but my goodness me, you are amazing at building relationships with people and smiling and making people feel good about themselves. And it's kind of, you know, someone that turned around to you when you were little and said, yeah, you've got frizzy hair, but my goodness me, what an amazing smile you've got. It completely reframes it. But people don't have those conversations.
No. And I think it's time that people probably do need to have those conversations. We are looking down the barrel of a very obvious discrimination that's coming up for leaders and managers in the workplace, which is a whole lot of people with children will not be able to come into the office, at least until September. And a whole lot of other people without children will have to come into the office. And that's a difference that is very difficult to talk about. You can't discriminate against or for one group or another. You just need to deal with the fact that people are going to be able to make different levels of contribution. Now, I've suffered all my life being a woman who doesn't have a child, because, oh my goodness, you are not quite a proper woman if you haven't been a mother, and you definitely can't comment on anything to do with children if you're not a mother. So I know that this kind of discrimination, the discrimination that are from your life choices, as well as the things you're just born with, we need to start having these conversations in teams. Managers and leaders need to have the courage to sit with the team and say, do we all feel like we have a voice? Do we feel like we're missing any contribution because we're a little bit uncomfortable with some types of people or some types of opinions or some types of voice? And if so, how can we be more inclusive? How can we make sure that all of you feel all the time you can say what needs to be said?
And how, I think that piece about what you do with that feeling of something doesn't feel quite right, whether it's against me or I'm observing it with someone else, what do I do with that? Because we were talking earlier about the protests in Bristol and so on, and actually looking at that sense of, do we just go and do we gossip behind someone's back in the office, or do we kind of, how do we react when we're not happy with something? Do we, what is our behavior? And actually, do we know how to deal with something appropriately and how to communicate and say, actually, well, this is okay, and I'm comfortable about something? It's having those mechanisms.
I have, in relation to men and women, I've coached leaders, in fact, more than once, men who've said, I hate the performance management conversation with this particular woman because she cries and then I just give in because I can't deal with a woman crying. And I at the time, I've thought, wow, that's a form of microaggression, really. We need to talk about these topics with the whole team and be inclusive in how we do that so that we can overcome the difficulties that we might be storing up for the future.
Yeah, exactly.